This next item, a report from the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security.
Call the honourable member for Holt.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm just about to, in a second, present on behalf of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security the committee's advisory report on the Counter-Terrorism Legislation Amendment Bill No. 1, 2015, and ask leave of the House to make a short statement in connection with the report.
Is leave granted? I call the honourable member for Longman. I thank the honourable member for Longman, and I call the honourable member for Holt.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased, as I've said, to present the committee's advisory report on the Counter-Terrorism Legislation Amendment Bill No. 1, 2015. The bill reflects the lessons learned from recent counter-terrorism investigations and gives effect to several recommendations from the Council of Australian Government's review of counter-terrorism legislation. The measures in the bill are intended to extend and enhance the effectiveness of the control order regime by allowing children 14 years of age or older to be the subject of a control order, allowing sensitive national security information to be withheld from the subject of a control order and their legal representative in a control order hearing, and allowing search, telecommunications interception and surveillance device warrants to be issued for the purpose of determining whether a person is complying with a control order. The bill also contains measures to improve the clarity and operation of a range of existing powers and provisions, and will introduce a new offence prohibiting the advocacy of genocide. In the course of the inquiry, the committee received 17 written submissions. It conducted one public hearing and received several private briefings. The committee received evidence about Australia's rapidly changing security environment and the present terrorist threat. It noted trends towards short-term, low-complexity attack plans and instances of young persons being involved in terrorist plots, including the horrific killing of Mr Curtis Cheng in October 2015 by a 15-year-old. The committee concluded that it is inappropriate that the control order regime be extended to young persons aged 14 and above, subject to the appropriate safeguards. To this end, the committee has recommended that the bill be amended to expressly provide for the right of a young person to legal representation in control order proceedings, remove the role of the court-appointed advocate, and clarify that the best interests of the young person is a primary consideration for the court in determining whether the conditions placed on the young person are necessary and appropriate, with national security remaining the paramount consideration. The committee acknowledges concerns that this bill may contribute or have a perception of contributing to social division by targeting sections of the community. The committee wants to emphasise strongly, however, that counter-terrorism laws are intended to protect the community as a whole and that the measures target conduct, not particular community groups. The committee reiterates its very strong support for efforts to promote social cohesion. On the 5th of February 2016, the Independent National Security Legislation Monitor handed down his first report into control order safeguards, addressing in particular the question of whether a system of special advocates should be introduced into the control order regime. The committee had the benefits of considering the monitor's findings as part of its own inquiry. The committee concluded that a system of special advocates should be introduced to represent the subject of a control order application where the court decides to consider evidence that their ordinary lawyer is excluded from receiving. The committee further recommended that the minimum standard of disclosure of information to the subject of a control order application should be sufficient to enable them to give effective instructions to their legal representative. Other recommendations in the committee report include a recklessness threshold for the offence of advocating genocide, which should be extended to include private as well as public advocacy, a requirement to have regard to the least interference with the liberty or privacy of a person when issuing a search, telecommunications interception or surveillance device, a warrant for monitoring compliance with the control order, and enhanced oversight, record-keeping and annual reporting requirements in relation to a range of powers. Following consideration of the recommendations, the committee has recommended that the bill be passed by the Parliament. On behalf of the committee, I wanted to thank the organisations and individuals who participated in this inquiry. And I would also like to acknowledge the work of the member for Wan and the former chair of the committee, Dan Tehan. It has been a quite pivotal period of time for the evolution and development of this committee. This committee has become far and away the most important committee to consider security matters on behalf of the Australian people in a way in which we can't disclose to the public, but we subject this as a Deputy Chair, speaking as a Deputy Chair, intelligence provided to us, legislation provided to us with intense scrutiny. And I'd like to pay tribute to the Chair of the committee for chairing the committee, the member for Wannon, in a particularly challenging time, for the Secretariat, a number of whom are sitting in the advisors box, to Julia Searle and to Dr Anna Dacre and others that worked with us, and secondees as well. Thank you very much for your work in very testing circumstances and on a number of occasions. The result of that, Deputy Speaker, is this, that so far this committee, with the 5 tranches of legislation that's contemplated, has made 157 recommendations. We'll be awaiting the government response to the recommendations contained in this particular report. So thus far, with the 136 recommendations that we made so far, 37 acts were amended, 1 act was repealed and 68 legislative changes were made. The committee has been making a substantial difference to the national security architecture of this country, balancing, I believe, the rights and liberties of the individual versus the necessity of providing security to the Australian community. I think, however, in closing, that this committee does need more power. I've said previously that this committee has been evolving. I've just returned from a trip to the United States where I've looked at the functioning of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And one of the key findings, I think, and one of the key take-home points I think I would have is that the committee in these modern times with leaks like the Snowden leaks, like other material that's been put out there, I think committees that are tasked on behalf of the Australian people to look at matters of national security, to look at legislation, need more powers, including increased access to operational activities of the intelligence agencies that we oversight. We've made progress so far with respect to that. We've brought the AFP under our umbrella in terms of its counter-terrorism functions. We have some element of the Customs and Border Protection Department. There is some other operational information that we're being given with respect to warrants on journalists, for example, and the access to metadata. But these are incremental and small steps. But fundamentally, I think on behalf that the Australian people, I think, would like this committee, need this committee to have the capacity to inquire more diligently and more thoroughly on matters that it should be tasked to look at. And that would include potentially the capacity for the committee to have self-referencing power. And I draw interested parties' attention to the sterling paper written by former Senator John Faulkner, which addressed this very issue. So I think, as I said, this is the 5th tranche of legislation that's been passed. I commend the bipartisanship of the committee. Bipartisanship of the committee should not be taken that we all sit there and agree with each other on every matter that we've discussed. I can say, without breaching any provisions of the Intelligence Services Act, that on many occasions there's been much robust conversation with respect to that, but that's the job of our committee, a committee behind closed doors that operates on behalf of the Australian people. As I said, I would like it to have more power. I think it would serve the interests of this parliament to have more power, and I look forward to this committee getting more power in the course of its evolution. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for